Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the February Color Kitz collection from Shimmerz Paints. I'm starting out my layout with a cut file. This cut file is from Paige Evans. It's one of the free ones that she has available. And as soon as I saw it, I thought it would be perfect with a mixed media background. So I'm working with a piece of gessoed thick white cardstock. And my first paint that I'm adding is a Shimmerz called Mint Condition. Before I began adding the paint, I used a pencil and I drew a few lines just to give me an idea of where the cut file was going to go, so I knew where to put the paint. I'm using my favorite way of applying color, which is using a little piece of plastic, otherwise known as the packaging technique. I'm adding some paint to the plastic and then I spray some water to help the color to move around a little bit to make it a little bit easier to apply. So the February kit has a Valentine's Day or a love theme to it, and I find that as much as I absolutely adore my family, whenever I see any kind of love themed or Valentine's themed scrapbooking collection, I always think of using photos of my dogs. Not because I don't love everybody else, but because I just love them so much, and sometimes I don't express it as much as I would like to. So I really love using this occasion to highlight all of my little puppies. Now I'm bringing in a second paint, and this paint is an Inklingz, and the name of it is Pistachio. So the Inklingz need to be activated with water, so I added some water to the top. I let that kind of sit there for a few seconds, and then I began using the packaging technique with the Inklingz. And I like the combination of these two colors. I thought that it worked well for the background. If you've watched my Shimmerz videos before, you may know that I really like to add multiple applications of the color to build it up and make it a little bit darker. Because I'm going to be layering a cut file on top, I like the contrast between the color in the background and the cut file. And I'm also going to be adding some modeling paste, so I want there to be contrast there too. So I don't want the color to be excessively dark, but I don't want it to be super light either. So I'm adding some color, I'm drying it using my heat tool, and then I'm going back and adding a little bit more. Now I'm layering the cut file on the top just to make sure that there is paint all around the cut file. And so there were a couple of spots where I had to extend the paint out a little, so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just adding a little bit more paint around the edge of this kind of big blob of color. I added quite a bit of the mint condition, and now I'm going back in and adding a little bit more of the pistachio. Once I was happy with the amount of color that I had in the background, I decided to move on to the next step, which is one that I usually use in my mixed media layouts, which is adding splatters to the background. And as I like to mention, I add the splatters all over, but I particularly like to add them around the outline of the area where I have the color, because that way you can see the splatters. And also I like the way it kind of blends the blob of color or the large area of color into the white background. So I add quite a few splatters most of the time. And you can see that I went back and forth between the mint condition and the pistachio. I like to make sure that the background is fairly or completely dry before adding splatters. That way you can really see them. Otherwise, they kind of get absorbed into the area of color that's there. So I added some heat from my heat tool, and now I'm done adding the paint to the background, but I did want to add some modeling paste. So I'm using the stencil that was included in the kit, and it has the word love repeated over and over again with some hearts. And I think this is just a great stencil, and it's made by Simple Stories. And I wanted to use the stencil along with some modeling paste. So I used the paste from the Crafter's Workshop, and I mixed it together with a little bit of thick body white acrylic paint. And that's to make sure that the modeling paste looks very white rather than off-white or a little grayish. And I really like the way the very white modeling paste looks. I think especially in a layout like this where there's going to be a lot of white, I want it to be more white than off-white so it doesn't clash with the other white elements. And for this layout, I want the modeling paste to cover the entire area where I have the green paint. So I added modeling paste on either side of that large area. And now I'm going to go back in the middle and add a little bit more in the center, just trying to fill in that area. It doesn't have to be perfect, but I do want you to some degree to be able to read the word love, at least in a couple of different places. Now the background is complete, and you'll be able to see that a little bit better in a few moments, but it's time to back the cut file. So I have to admit that backing cut files isn't my favorite thing. The way that I like to do it, though, is I like to take the cut file, flip it over, flip my pattern paper over, trace on the inside of the image that I want to back, and then cut out a slightly larger shape and then attach it down to the back of the cut file. And I know that you can use your die cutting machine to cut out the shapes that you want to use to back your cut file. I've tried it in the past. It's never quite worked out for me, so I just go ahead and hand cut all of the shapes. The thing that I don't like about it is touching the glue so much and then touching the cut file. But luckily, this one ended up being pretty clean by the end, even with me having glue all over my fingers. I'm not going to include the whole process of me cutting out the shapes and backing the cut file, but I did continue tracing the shapes, cutting them out, and gluing them down. I use the Silhouette Cameo, that's my electronic die cutting machine, and I use the offset feature to create a large mat for the whole cut file. I don't know if I've ever used the offset exactly like this before, but in any case, so I attached the cut file that I backed to this offset mat, and I liked the way it looked. It just gave a little bit of dimension to the cut file. And I also left 3 of the hearts without any backing, so you would be able to see the color and the modeling paste that's in the background. I'm going to mount my mixed media background on top of these papers. This diagonal stripe paper I thought was perfect to use because it has all of the different colors of this collection. And then I had a piece of hot pink cardstock that I cut a little bit smaller and attached over the diagonal pattern paper. Then I trimmed down my mixed media background a little bit so it would fit on top of that piece of hot pink paper. I just wanted a really little tiny border of that darker pink paper. And now I'm ready to attach down the cut file. And to do that, I'm using some Inklingz gel glue. And this glue dries pretty quickly, so I'm always trying to work really quickly to get the glue on the whole cut file before the glue that I put down first begins to dry. So I added the glue as quickly as I could, and then just in case the glue did dry a little bit, I went back to the beginning and I added a little bit more glue in a couple of spots. And then I flipped over the cut file and attached it down to the background. And then I straightened out the cut file and then pressed it down just to make sure that it will adhere well to the background. Now I'm ready to add my photo. I love adding the photo to the layout. I have some pieces of cardstock that I cut down. The one on the left is a mat for the photo, and the smaller one on the right is a mat for a piece of ephemera. The photo that I'm using is of our dog Coco. Very sadly, Coco passed away at the end of last month, and we're just all missing her so much and broken up about it. So I just felt like I wanted to include a picture of her on this layout because we do love her so much and miss her. And we'll miss her forever. So I'm using this sentiment that says, "I love you." That's going to go at the bottom of the layout, and then her photo is going to go in the upper right-hand corner. And I love the picture. You could really see her beautiful eyes, and it's cute. She has her face rested against the pillow on the couch, which she was not supposed to go on the couch, but we just couldn't help but let her go up there. So eventually my husband kind of got on board with that, even though he was really not a fan of it for many years. But she loved to lay on the couch and sit next to us and get her little belly rubbed. And yeah, she was such a sweetie. So I added 2 of the dots. You could see those circles on the left-hand side and the lower portion of the layout. I love the way they're shiny and they bring another texture to the layout. And I also spread around a number of the pieces of ephemera, a lot of hearts, and then a couple of flowers too. And then I attached all of those pieces down to the layout. I didn't add a ton of ephemera because the layout is already so busy with all of the hearts, but I did like the addition of a couple of pieces of ephemera. I especially like those blue hearts that say "Be Mine," because along with the key that I'm just about to attach down and layer over the heart, they add a touch of blue to the layout. So I am going to pick up on that color and use that for the rest of the title. Now, I have these mistables from Pink Paisley. I have no idea how old they are. They're probably pretty old. I got them at the rummage sale table at a crop that I went to. And they're specifically made with some resist on them so that when you apply paint over the top, you'll be able to see a pattern that emerges in the areas where the paint doesn't adhere to. So in order to mimic that same color of blue, I used a Shimmerz called Pull Me Close that was in a past Color Kitz collection. And I think that this is a pretty good match for that color. And I added a couple of coats of it to these letters and then allowed them to dry. And now I'm attaching down the sentiment that's kind of part of the title, the I Love You, Coco. And then I'm pulling the stickers off of the back of the letters. The last time I used similar letters, I did not remember to pull the adhesive backing off the back, and I glued them down, and then they all started falling off, but the adhesive backing was glued to the layout. So this time I remembered to remove that backing, and then I glued down the word Coco. So it's hard to see what I'm doing here. I am using a little tool that I have to punch some holes for stitching, and I have to press really hard because there's a lot of layers of paper there, but I thought that it would add a nice little something to the layout to stitch not around all of the hearts, but just around those 3 open hearts. So I punch all the way around those 3 hearts, and now I'm using some embroidery floss in white, and I'm just doing a simple back stitch, and I think that'll add a nice touch to the layout. I love stitching on cut files. There's just something about adding stitching that I feel like makes them look very finished. So I do stitch on cut files quite often. This time I'm just adding a little bit of an accent of stitching, just like I said, around the 3 hearts that are not backed with pattern paper. And then I added just a couple of pearls to the center of the butterfly just to give it a little bit of detail. And then I found that I had some white bows in my stash, so I decided to add those to add another texture to the layout. And they have little sticky dots on the back, but they're actually not sticky, so those have to be peeled off, and then I add a little bit of glue to hold them down. I was thinking that the blue on the letters was right in a lot of ways, but just maybe a little bit too bright, so I decided that I was going to take a little bit of gesso and dull down the color just a little bit. So I'm adding it with my pinky, and I think this works to dull down the color a little bit. So that's the last step, and the layout is complete. Thank you so much for watching. Please take a look in the description box where you'll find a link to the Shimmer shop. And when you shop there, don't forget to use my name in the comments to receive a free gift. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.